My name is Hannah Collins. I'm 27 years old, and I'll never forget the day my parents decided I was disposable. It was a Tuesday in late September, one of those suffocating Florida afternoons where the humidity clings to your skin like a wet blanket, the kind of day that makes you question why anyone would voluntarily live in this swamp we call the Sunshine State. I remember because I had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift at Orlando General Hospital, my scrubs still damp with sweat, and God knows what else from the emergency room. I'd been working there for 3 months since graduating from nursing school. Not exactly my dream job, but it paid the bills and gave me the experience I needed. More importantly, it allowed me to live at home with my parents, Michael and Susan Collins, while I saved money for my own place. At least, that was the plan. The drive home to our suburban neighborhood in Winter Park should have been peaceful. Tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, the kind of middle-class paradise that looks perfect from the outside. But as I pulled into our driveway, something felt off. My dad's car was there, which was unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. He usually worked late at his accounting firm. Mom's sedan sat next to it, and beside that was my brother Ethan's flashy red Mustang, the one Dad had bought him for his college graduation. I sat in my beaten-up Honda Civic for a moment, too tired to move. The AC wheezed as it struggled against the heat, and I could see the condensation already forming on the windows. Through the living room window, I caught glimpses of movement. My family was home, probably having dinner without me again. It wouldn't be the first time. You see, I'd grown up being the responsible one, the one who never caused trouble, never asked for much, while Ethan was the star athlete, the charming one who could make our parents beam with pride just by walking into a room. I was the quiet daughter who did her homework, helped with chores, and never complained. Even when I decided to pursue nursing, something I genuinely loved, their reaction had been lukewarm at best. "Nursing is nice, honey," Mom had said with that particular smile she reserved for things she didn't quite understand. "But are you sure you wouldn't prefer teaching? It's more stable." Meanwhile, when Ethan announced he was switching his major from business to mechanical engineering, they threw him a celebration dinner and called all the relatives to brag about their brilliant engineer son. I pushed through the front door, my feet aching in my sneakers, and was immediately hit by the smell of Mom's famous lasagna. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten since grabbing a stale muffin from the hospital cafeteria that morning. The house was unusually quiet, which struck me as odd since I'd seen everyone's cars outside. "Hello," I called out, dropping my bag by the door. "I'm home." No response. I walked through the foyer, past the family photos lining the hallway. Dozens of pictures of Ethan's achievements, his football trophies, his graduation, his first day at his new engineering job. There were a few pictures of me scattered among them, but they seemed to fade into the background, like I was just part of the furniture. The kitchen was empty, but there were dishes in the sink, and the lingering warmth of a recent meal. A pot of leftover lasagna sat covered on the counter, still warm. They'd eaten without me. Again. At this point, I wasn't even surprised. That's when I saw it. Sitting in the center of our kitchen table, propped up against the salt and pepper shakers, was a folded piece of paper with my name written across it in Mom's careful handwriting. My heart did a weird little skip, and I felt that familiar knot of anxiety that had become my constant companion whenever it came to my family. I approached the table slowly, as if the note might explode if I moved too quickly. The silence of the house felt heavy now, oppressive. Where was everyone? Why was it so quiet? With shaking hands, I unfolded the paper. The message was brief, written in Mom's neat cursive. "Hannah, your father and I have decided it's time for you to find your own place. Ethan needs more space as he starts his career, and we think it would be best for everyone if you moved out by the end of the week. We've already talked to him about converting your room into a home office. We know you're responsible enough to handle this on your own. Find another place. Mom and Dad." I read it once, twice, 3 times. The words didn't change, but somehow they seemed to get colder each time I read them. Find another place. Not, we need to talk about your future. Not, let's discuss you moving out. Not even, we think it's time for you to be independent. Just, find another place. Like I was some stray cat they'd been tolerating and had finally decided to shoo away. I stood there in our kitchen, surrounded by the familiar yellow walls Mom had painted when I was in high school, the same refrigerator covered in Ethan's old achievements and recent work photos, the same table where we'd eaten family dinners for years. But suddenly, it all felt foreign, like I was standing in a stranger's house. The sound of my own heartbeat seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. My hands were trembling now, and I could feel that hot prickle behind my eyes that warned of tears coming. But I wouldn't cry. Not yet. Not here. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my pocket. Then, moving like I was underwater, I walked upstairs to my bedroom, the same room I'd occupied since I was 5 years old. The walls were still painted the soft purple I'd chosen when I turned 13. My nursing school certificates hung in frames above my desk, next to a few photos of me with friends from college. It looked like the room of someone who mattered, someone who belonged somewhere. But apparently, I didn't belong here anymore. I could hear voices now, coming from the backyard. Laughter. I moved to my window and peered through the blinds. There they were, Mom, Dad, and Ethan, sitting around our patio table, sharing what looked like dessert and drinks. Ethan was gesticulating wildly as he told some story, and my parents were hanging on every word, laughing at all the right moments. They looked happy, relaxed, like a weight had been lifted off their shoulders. The weight had been me. I don't know how long I stood there watching them through the blinds, but eventually, I forced myself to move. If I was going to leave, and clearly, I didn't have a choice in the matter, I needed to pack. I pulled my old duffel bags from the closet and started throwing clothes into them randomly. Jeans, scrubs, the few nice dresses I owned, underwear, pajamas. I moved mechanically, my mind strangely blank except for one thought that kept repeating like a broken record. Find another place. Find another place. Find another place. I packed my laptop, my nursing textbooks, the few pieces of jewelry that actually meant something to me. I left behind most of the decorations, the posters, the little knickknacks I'd collected over the years. They belonged to the girl who used to live here, the girl who thought she was part of a family. That girl was apparently gone now. The hardest part was packing the photo albums, pictures of family vacations, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. In every single one, I looked happy. We all looked happy. Had it all been an illusion? Had I been fooling myself all these years, thinking I mattered to them? I was shoving the albums into my bag when I heard footsteps on the stairs. My door was closed, but I could tell someone was standing outside it. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe one of them was coming to check on me, to explain, to tell me this was all a misunderstanding. But the footsteps moved past my door and continued down the hall to Ethan's room. Of course, I finished packing in silence, my movements becoming more efficient as the shock began to wear off and anger started to take its place. 27 years old, and I was being kicked out of my childhood home with less ceremony than they'd give a house guest who'd overstayed their welcome. By the time I was loading my bags into my car, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. The automatic porch light had already clicked on, casting long shadows across our driveway. I made 3 trips from my room to my car, and not once did anyone come to check on me. Not once did anyone ask if I needed help, or where I was going, or if I was okay. The sounds of conversation and laughter continued to drift from the backyard, a soundtrack to my exile. As I threw the last bag into my trunk, I realized I didn't actually know where I was going. I had some money saved from my job, but not enough for a security deposit and first month's rent on a decent apartment. I had a few friends from nursing school, but most of them had moved away or were in similar situations themselves. Young professionals still figuring out their lives. For the first time since reading that note, the full reality of my situation hit me. I was essentially homeless. At 27, with a nursing degree and a job at a major hospital, I was about to spend the night in my car because my own parents couldn't be bothered to give me more than a few hours notice before throwing me out. I sat in my car for a long moment, key in the ignition but not turning it. Part of me wanted to march into that backyard and demand an explanation. I wanted to ask them how they could do this to me, how they could reduce 27 years of my life to a casual note left on the kitchen table. I wanted to remind them of all the times I'd helped around the house, all the times I'd been there for them, all the ways I'd tried to make them proud. But I knew it wouldn't matter. The decision had clearly been made without me, probably discussed and finalized while I was at work, saving lives and trying to build a career. They'd already moved on, already started planning Ethan's home office in my room. Instead, I started the engine. As I backed out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of my family through the kitchen window. They were inside now, cleaning up from dinner, moving around each other with the practiced ease of people who belong together. Mom was loading the dishwasher while Dad dried dishes, and Ethan was leaning against the counter, probably telling them about his day at work. They looked complete without me, like I'd never been there at all. I drove slowly through our neighborhood, past houses where other families were settling in for the evening. Porch lights glowed warmly, and I could see the blue flicker of televisions through living room windows. Normal families doing normal things. Families that didn't write notes to their children telling them to find another place. At the stop sign at the end of our street, I pulled out my phone and stared at it for a long moment. I could call one of my nursing school friends, see if anyone had a couch I could crash on for a few nights. I could check into a cheap motel until I figured out something more permanent. I could even call my parents, demand that they at least give me more time to find a place. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I put my phone in the cup holder, turned left onto the main road, and started driving south. I had no destination in mind, no plan, no idea what I was going to do. All I knew was that I needed to get away from Winter Park, away from the house that was no longer my home, away from the family that had made it clear I was no longer wanted. The highway stretched out in front of me, dark and uncertain. But for the first time in hours, I felt something other than hurt and anger. I felt free. I drove for hours that night, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The Florida highways blurred past me in a stream of headlights and neon signs, gas stations and fast food restaurants marking the miles I was putting between myself and the life I'd known. At first, I had no destination in mind. I just drove, following the flow of traffic south on I-4, then merging onto the Florida Turnpike when the signs pointed toward Miami. The familiar landmarks of Central Florida gradually gave way to unfamiliar territory, small towns I'd never heard of, exit signs for places that meant nothing to me. Around midnight, exhaustion started to creep in. My eyes burned from staring at the road, and my back ached from sitting in the same position for so long. I'd been running on adrenaline and anger for hours, but both were starting to fade, leaving behind a hollow emptiness that made my chest feel tight. I pulled off at a rest stop near Fort Pierce, parking under one of the harsh fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered in the humid night air. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few long-haul trucks, and a couple of other cars with travelers who, like me, were probably running from something. I turned off the engine and sat in the sudden silence, listening to the tick-tick-tick of the cooling motor. Only then did I realize I was shaking, not just my hands, but my whole body, like I was cold despite the oppressive Florida heat. What was I doing? Where was I going? I had maybe $300 in my checking account, a tank of gas, and everything I owned crammed into the back of my Honda. I had a job, but that was back in Orlando, and I couldn't exactly commute from wherever I was going to end up. I had no plan, no safety net, no one to call. For the first time since leaving the house, I allowed myself to really feel the full weight of what had happened. My parents, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, who had raised me, who I had trusted completely, had thrown me away like garbage, not gradually, not with discussion or warning, but with a note left on the kitchen table like I was some stranger who'd overstayed their welcome. The tears came then, hot and fast and unstoppable. I cried for the little girl who had tried so hard to make her parents proud, who had never been quite good enough. I cried for all the times I'd made excuses for their favoritism, telling myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need their approval. I cried for the woman I was now, 27 years old and sleeping in her car because she had nowhere else to go. I must have cried for an hour, ugly, gasping sobs that left me drained and hollow. When the tears finally stopped, I felt strangely cleansed, like I'd purged something toxic from my system. I wiped my face with a fast food napkin I found in my glove compartment and took a long, shaky breath. A soft knock on my passenger window made me jump. A woman about my age was standing there, concern written across her face. She was wearing scrubs, the same teal color they used at the hospital where I worked, and her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, like she'd just gotten off a long shift. I rolled down my window, suddenly self-conscious about my red, puffy eyes and tear-stained cheeks. "Hey," she said softly, "are you okay? I saw you crying, and I just wanted to make sure you weren't hurt or anything." Her voice was warm, with just a hint of a southern accent that made her sound like she actually cared about the answer to her question. It had been so long since someone had asked me if I was okay and really meant it that I almost started crying again. I'm fine," I managed, though we both knew it was a lie. "I'm just having a rough night." She nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. "Mind if I sit with you for a minute? I'm Sarah, by the way. Sarah Martinez." I hesitated for a moment, then unlocked the passenger door. She climbed in, bringing with her the familiar scent of hospital disinfectant and hand sanitizer that I knew so well. "I'm Hannah," I said, "and you're a nurse." She smiled for the first time, and it transformed her entire face. "Good guess. Emergency room at Martin Medical Center. Just got off a 12-hour shift and stopped for coffee before the drive home. What about you? You've got that look." "What look?" "The 1,000-yard stare we all get after dealing with too much medical drama." She studied my face for a moment. Plus, you've got that little callus on your index finger from writing so many charts, and there's a stethoscope hanging from your rearview mirror." I glanced up and realized she was right. I'd forgotten about the stethoscope. A graduation gift from one of my favorite nursing school professors. "Orlando General," I admitted, though I guess not anymore. "Let me guess," Sarah said, settling back into the passenger seat like she had all the time in the world. "Family drama." Something about her easy manner, the way she asked without judgment or pity, made the whole story pour out of me. I told her about my parents, about Ethan, about the note on the kitchen table, and the sound of their laughter floating from the backyard while I packed my life into garbage bags. Sarah listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of sympathy. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Jesus," she finally said. "That's brutal. I'm sorry." Those two simple words, "I'm sorry," meant more to me than she could possibly know. Not, "You're better off without them," or "Everything happens for a reason," or any of the other platitudes people usually offered, just genuine sympathy for what I'd been through. "So where are you headed?" she asked. "I have absolutely no idea," I said, and found myself laughing despite everything. "And I've been driving south for hours, and I just realized I don't even know where I'm going." Sarah was quiet for a moment, and I could almost see her thinking. Then she turned to face me fully, her expression serious. "This is going to sound crazy," she said, "and feel free to tell me to mind my own business. But I have a spare bedroom, and I could use a roommate to help with the rent. It's nothing fancy, just a little apartment in Stewart, about 20 minutes from here. But it's clean and safe, and you'd be welcome to stay as long as you need." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "You don't even know me. I know you're a nurse, which means you're probably responsible and capable of taking care of yourself and others. I know you're going through hell right now, but you're handling it with more grace than most people would. And I know what it's like to feel like you don't have anywhere to turn." She paused, looking out at the nearly empty parking lot. "Besides, I've been where you are. Maybe not exactly the same situation, but I've been the person crying in a car at a rest stop in the middle of the night, wondering what the hell I was going to do next. I couldn't impose on you like that," I started to say, but she held up a hand. "You wouldn't be imposing. Like I said, I need a roommate anyway. The rent's $800 a month, so $400 each would actually be perfect, and Stewart's got a couple of good hospitals if you're looking to transfer jobs." I felt like I was in some kind of alternate reality. 6 hours ago, I'd been a daughter living in her childhood bedroom. Now I was sitting in a rest stop parking lot with a stranger who was offering me not just a place to stay, but a chance to start over. Why are you doing this?" I asked. Sarah shrugged. "Because someone did it for me once, when I needed it most. And because you look like the kind of person who would do the same for someone else." I thought about that for a moment. She was right. If I'd seen someone in my situation, I probably would have tried to help. But it felt strange to be on the receiving end of that kind of kindness from someone who owed me nothing. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. "Say you'll at least come look at the place before you make any decisions. It's late, and you're exhausted, and making life-changing choices at 2 a.m. rarely works out well." She had a point. I was so tired I could barely think straight, and the idea of spending the night in my car in a rest stop parking lot was becoming less appealing by the minute. "Okay," I heard myself say. "I'll look at it." Sarah smiled again, that same warm expression that made her whole face light up. "Great, just follow me. It's not far." She got out of my car and walked over to a sensible white sedan parked a few spaces away. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. In the span of an hour, I'd gone from having nowhere to go to potentially having a place to live, and a roommate who seemed to understand exactly what I was going through. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was desperation, but as I started my car and followed Sarah's taillights back onto the highway, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The drive to Stewart was short, winding through small coastal towns that looked peaceful and quiet in the early morning darkness. Sarah's apartment complex was modest but well-maintained, with palm trees lining the parking lot and a small pool that sparkled under the security lights. She led me up a flight of stairs to apartment 2B and unlocked the door, flipping on lights as we walked through. The space was small but cozy, with a living room that opened onto a tiny kitchen and a sliding glass door that led to a small balcony. Everything was neat and clean, with colorful artwork on the walls and plants scattered throughout that made the space feel alive and welcoming. "The spare bedroom is down here," Sarah said, leading me down a short hallway. She opened a door to reveal a simple but comfortable room with a double bed, a dresser, and a window that faced east. "It's not much, but it gets great morning light." I walked to the window and looked out at the view. In the distance, I could just make out the lights of boats in the harbor, and beyond that, the dark expanse of the ocean. It was nothing like the view from my bedroom window at my parents' house, where I could see into our neighbors' backyards and the community pool where I'd learned to swim. This was completely different. This was a fresh start. "It's perfect," I said, and meant it. Sarah showed me the rest of the apartment, the bathroom we'd share, the small laundry closet, the balcony where she grew herbs in little pots. The whole place felt lived in and comfortable, like a real home rather than just a place to sleep. "So what do you think?" she asked as we stood in the living room. I thought about my parents, probably sleeping peacefully in their bed, not wondering where I was or if I was safe. I thought about Ethan, probably already planning how to redecorate my room. I thought about the job I'd have to leave behind, the life I'd built that had apparently been built on sand. Then I looked around Sarah's apartment, our apartment, maybe, and imagined myself living here, starting over, building something new and real and mine. "I think I'd like to stay," I said. "Great," Sarah said, and I could hear the genuine happiness in her voice. "We can work out all the details tomorrow, but for tonight, why don't you get some sleep? You look dead on your feet." She was right. The adrenaline that had carried me through the evening was completely gone now, leaving me feeling like I might collapse at any moment. She helped me bring my bags in from the car, chattering about practical things like where to get groceries and which coffee shop had the best breakfast sandwiches. As I settled into the unfamiliar bed in my new room, I thought about how strange life could be. This morning, I'd woken up in my childhood bedroom, secure in my place in the world, even if that place wasn't perfect. Tonight, I was falling asleep in a stranger's apartment, homeless and jobless, but somehow more hopeful than I'd felt in years. Through the thin walls, I could hear Sarah moving around, getting ready for bed after her own long day. The sounds were comforting somehow, proof that I wasn't alone, that someone cared enough to take a chance on me when my own family wouldn't. Just before I drifted off to sleep, my phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my heart jumped, thinking it might be one of my parents, finally realizing what they'd done and wanting to apologize. But it was just a notification from my bank, confirming the automatic payment of my car insurance. Even my phone was reminding me that I had practical things to figure out, a new life to build from scratch. I turned the phone face down on the nightstand and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, I would start figuring out how to transfer my job, how to make this arrangement with Sarah work, how to build a life that was truly my own. Tonight, I was just grateful to have a roof over my head and someone who had shown me kindness when I needed it most. As I finally fell asleep, I could hear the distant sound of waves against the shore, a rhythm I'd never fallen asleep to before. It was different from everything I'd known, but it wasn't frightening. It was the sound of possibility. I woke up to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the sound of coffee brewing in a kitchen that wasn't mine. For a moment, I lay there in confusion, staring at ceiling I didn't recognize, until the events of the previous day came rushing back like a cold slap to the face. The note, the packing, the drive through the night. Sarah. I sat up slowly, my body stiff from the emotional exhaustion and the unfamiliar mattress. Through the east-facing window, I could see morning light dancing on water in the distance. The harbor Sarah had mentioned, probably, or maybe just a canal. Either way, it was beautiful in a way that made my chest feel lighter, despite everything. The clock on the nightstand read 8:47 a.m. I'd slept for nearly 6 hours straight, which was more than I'd managed most nights in recent months. There was something about being in a place where no one expected anything from me, where I didn't have to perform the role of the dutiful daughter who never quite measured up. I could hear Sarah moving around in the kitchen, the soft clink of dishes and the sound of morning news playing quietly on what must have been a small television. The domestic sounds were comforting, reminding me of weekend mornings when I was little, before Ethan was born, when it was just me and Mom making pancakes while Dad read the newspaper. I pushed that memory away. Those people, the parents who used to make me feel loved and wanted, apparently didn't exist anymore. Or maybe they never had, and I'd just been too naive to see the truth. After a quick shower in Sarah's surprisingly spacious bathroom, I got dressed in clean scrubs and ventured out to the kitchen. Sarah was sitting at a small table by the sliding glass door, holding a steaming mug and scrolling through something on her phone. She'd changed out of her work clothes into yoga pants and an oversized t-shirt that read, "World's Okayest Nurse," and her dark hair was loose around her shoulders. "Morning," she said, looking up with a smile. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," I admitted. "Thank you again for letting me stay. I still can't believe you did that for a complete stranger." "Complete stranger?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "I know you're a nurse named Hannah who drives a Honda and cries prettier than anyone has a right to. That's practically like being best friends." I laughed despite myself, feeling some of the tension in my shoulders release. "Cries prettier? That's definitely going on my resume under special skills." "Coffee?" Sarah asked, gesturing toward a full pot on the counter. "I made extra, figuring you'd need it after yesterday." I poured myself a cup, adding cream and sugar while Sarah watched with the kind of attention people usually reserved for job interviews. "What?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing. Just, you seem different this morning. Less shell-shocked. More like yourself, maybe." I considered that as I took my first sip. She was right. I did feel different. Yesterday I'd felt like I was drowning, like the ground had disappeared from under my feet, and I was falling through space with nothing to catch me. Today, I felt more solid, more present, still hurt, still angry, but not quite so lost. "I called in sick to work," I said, settling into the chair across from her. "Figured I needed a day to process everything and figure out next steps." "Smart. What are you thinking?" I'd been asking myself the same question since I woke up. I need to find a job down here, obviously. I can't commute from Stewart to Orlando every day, even if I wanted to go back to that life, which I don't. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Martin Medical Center is always hiring ER nurses. It's a good hospital, smaller than Orlando General, but the staff is tight-knit, kind of like a family, actually." She paused, realizing what she'd said. "I'm sorry, probably not the best comparison right now." "It's okay," I said, and was surprised to find that it was. I need to start thinking about what kind of family I actually want, instead of just accepting what I was born into. We talked for the next hour about practical things. How to transfer my nursing license, which hospitals in the area had the best reputations, how much it would cost to break my lease in Orlando. Thankfully, I'd been living at home, so that wasn't an issue. Sarah pulled up job listings on her laptop, circling ones that looked promising, explaining the differences between the various hospitals and clinics in the area. "There's also Treasure Coast Medical," she said, pointing to a listing on her screen. "It's about 15 minutes from here, and they're specifically looking for ER nurses with recent graduation experience. Plus, the pay is actually better than what I make at Martin." I leaned over to read the job description, accidentally catching a whiff of Sarah's shampoo, something floral and light that somehow made me feel calm. It occurred to me that this was the first time in years I'd sat around a kitchen table with someone who was genuinely trying to help me, not because they felt obligated to, but because they wanted to. "I should apply today," I said. "Strike while I'm still feeling brave. That's the spirit. And if you want, I could put in a word at Martin, too. My supervisor is always complaining about being short-staffed." Around noon, we drove to the beach. It was Sarah's idea. She said I looked like I needed to see the ocean, and she was right. I'd lived in Florida my entire life, but my family had never been big on beach trips. Too sandy, Mom always said. Too crowded. Too much sun. But this beach was different from the tourist-packed stretches of sand I remembered from childhood. It was quieter, more natural, with dunes covered in seagrass and small flocks of seabirds pecking at the waves. Edge. The Atlantic stretched endlessly toward the horizon, dark blue-green under the afternoon sun. We walked along the water's edge, our feet sinking into the wet sand, occasionally dodging the larger waves that reached higher up the beach. Sarah chattered easily about her work, her friends, her plans to eventually go back to school for her nurse practitioner degree. She had a way of talking that made me feel included without pressuring me to reciprocate, which was perfect because I was still processing too much to be great company. "Can I ask you something?" I said, as we stopped to watch a pelican dive for fish in the surf. "Shoot. Yesterday, at the rest stop, you said you'd been where I was." "What did you mean?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, picking up a shell and turning it over in her hands. "My parents are difficult," she finally said. "Very traditional, very focused on what they think success should look like. When I told them I was gay, they basically gave me an ultimatum: get therapy to fix myself, or get out of their lives." I felt my stomach clench in sympathy. "What did you choose?" "I chose myself," she said simply. "Packed up my car, drove from Tampa to here, and started over. That was 3 years ago, and I haven't spoken to them since. Do you regret it?" "Sometimes I regret that it had to happen at all. I miss the idea of having parents who love and accept me. But I don't regret choosing to live authentically, even if it meant losing them." We walked in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in our own thoughts. The sun was warm on my shoulders, and the sound of the waves was hypnotic, washing away some of the tension I'd been carrying for so long. I'd forgotten what it felt like to not have it. "I keep thinking I should call them," I said eventually. "My parents. Try to explain why I'm hurt. Ask them to reconsider. Do you think it would change anything?" I considered that honestly. "No." They made their choice pretty clear. "Then maybe the question isn't whether you should call them, but whether you're ready to accept that their choice doesn't define your worth." That hit me like a physical blow. Not because it was harsh, but because it was true. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to earn my parents' approval, measuring my success by their reaction, defining myself through their eyes. The idea that I could exist independently of their opinion felt both terrifying and liberating. We spent the rest of the afternoon on the beach, talking about everything and nothing. Sarah told me about her ex-girlfriend who'd broken her heart by choosing her parents over their relationship. I told her about nursing school, about the patients who'd taught me more about resilience than any textbook ever could. We talked about favorite movies and terrible childhood fashion choices, and what we wanted our lives to look like in 5 years. It was the kind of conversation I'd been craving for years without even realizing it. Honest, meandering, free of judgment or expectation. By the time we walked back to the car, I felt like I'd known Sarah for months instead of less than 24 hours. That evening, back at the apartment, I sat on the small balcony with my laptop, crafting emails to potential employers. Sarah had insisted on making dinner. "You're processing major life trauma," she'd said. "The least I can do is handle the cooking." So the apartment smelled like garlic and herbs while I worked. As I typed cover letters and filled out applications, I found myself writing things I'd never articulated before. About wanting to work somewhere that valued compassion over efficiency. About believing that healthcare should be about more than just treating symptoms. About wanting to be part of a team that felt like a real community. It was like I was meeting myself for the first time, discovering what I actually wanted, instead of what I thought I should want. My phone buzzed with a text message, and my heart jumped. For a split second, I hoped it might be my parents, realizing their mistake and wanting to apologize. Instead, it was from my brother Ethan. "Mom said you moved out. Where are you staying?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What happened?" Just a question about logistics, like I was some acquaintance he needed to keep track of for holiday card purposes. I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling that familiar knot of hurt and anger forming in my stomach. Then I deleted it without responding. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked from the kitchen. "Yeah," I said, and realized I meant it. Just deciding what deserves my attention and what doesn't. By the time I went to bed that night, I'd submitted applications to 4 different hospitals and 2 private clinics. I'd also changed my emergency contact information from my parents to Sarah, which felt both practical and symbolic. As I lay in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of my new neighborhood, I thought about the last 48 hours. 2 days ago, I'd been a daughter living in her childhood bedroom, trying to earn love that apparently wasn't available. Now, I was something else entirely. A woman with her own space, her own choices, her own future to build. It was terrifying. It was also the most hopeful I'd felt in years. Through the thin wall between our bedrooms, I could hear Sarah's TV playing quietly, the sound of someone settling in for the night. The knowledge that someone was nearby, someone who had chosen to help me without expecting anything in return, made me feel less alone than I had in months. Tomorrow, I would start building a new life from scratch. Tonight, I was exactly where I needed to be. 3 weeks later, I was standing in the break room at Treasure Coast Medical Center, wearing scrubs that actually fit properly, and a name badge that said Hannah Collins, RN, in crisp black letters. The job interview had gone better than I'd dared to hope. The nursing director, Maria Santos, had been impressed with my experience at Orlando General and had offered me the position on the spot. Emergency room nursing in a smaller hospital, she'd explained, means you'll see everything. Car accidents, heart attacks, kids with broken arms, elderly patients with pneumonia. You'll need to be adaptable, compassionate, and quick on your feet. All things I'd learned to be, though not necessarily in the context she meant. My first few shifts had been overwhelming but exhilarating. The pace was different from Orlando General, still busy, but more personal somehow. I actually had time to talk to patients, to remember their names, to follow up on cases that had touched me. It felt like what I'd imagined nursing would be like when I first decided to pursue it. "Hannah," called Jenny Rodriguez, one of the other ER nurses who'd taken me under her wing. "Room 3 needs vitals, and we've got an ambulance coming in 5 minutes. I grabbed my stethoscope and headed toward room 3, where a middle-aged man was sitting on the examination table looking embarrassed. His wife stood beside him, her hands twisted together with worry. "Mr. Patterson?" I said, checking his chart. "I'm Hannah, your nurse. How are you feeling?" "Foolish," he said with a rueful smile. "I was trying to fix a leak in the roof, and the ladder decided it had other plans." His wife rolled her eyes fondly. "I told him to call a professional. But does he listen? 37 years of marriage, and the man still thinks he's invincible." As I took Mr. Patterson's blood pressure and temperature, listening to the familiar banter between husband and wife, I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. Not exactly envy, but a kind of wistfulness for the kind of partnership they obviously shared. The way she scolded him with obvious love, the way he accepted her concern with good humor. It was what I'd always imagined marriage should look like. "Your vitals look good," I told him, making notes on his chart. "Dr. Martinez will be in shortly to take a look at that shoulder." "Thank you, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, squeezing my hand briefly. "You're very kind." Such a simple compliment, but it stayed with me for the rest of my shift. At Orlando General, I'd been efficient, competent, professional, but here, I was apparently kind. It felt like a revelation. The ambulance Jenny had mentioned brought in a teenage girl who'd been in a car accident. Not serious, thankfully, but scary enough that her parents were beside themselves with worry. As I helped get her settled and comfortable, I watched her mother smooth her hair back from her forehead with the kind of gentle, automatic tenderness that spoke of years of scraped knees and hurt feelings and unconditional love. For just a moment, I let myself imagine what it would have felt like to have that kind of mother. Not the version who left notes on kitchen tables, but the kind who would drop everything to be by your bedside, who would fight anyone who tried to hurt you, who would love you fiercely no matter what. But then I pushed the thought away. I was building a new life now, and dwelling on what I'd never had wasn't going to help me appreciate what I was gaining. After my shift ended at 11 p.m., I drove home through the quiet streets of Stuart, past the harbor where boats bobbed gently at their moorings and the palm trees rustled in the ocean breeze. Home. It was strange how quickly Sarah's apartment had started to feel like home, more than my parents' house ever really had. Sarah was in the kitchen when I walked in, sitting at the table with textbooks and notebooks spread around her, a half-eaten sandwich at her elbow. "How was work?" she asked, looking up from what appeared to be a pharmacology study guide. "Good. Busy. A ladder fell on a man, and a teenager learned why wearing seatbelts is important." I poured myself a glass of water and sat down across from her. "What's all this?" "Nurse practitioner applications," she said, gesturing at the paperwork. I finally decided to stop talking about it and actually do it. I picked up one of the brochures, University of Florida's Family Nurse Practitioner Program. "This is amazing, Sarah. When would you start?" "Next fall, if I get in. It means 2 years of school while working, which is going to be brutal, but," she shrugged, but I could see the excitement in her eyes. "I want to do more than just patch people up and send them home. I want to be able to really help them, you know?" I did know. It was one of the things I'd learned I loved about working at Treasure Coast, the opportunity to actually connect with patients, to be part of their healing process instead of just another face in scrubs. "You'll get in," I said confidently, "and when you're a famous nurse practitioner with your own clinic, remember the little people who knew you when—" Sarah laughed. "Deal." "Speaking of deals, I have something to tell you." Something in her tone made me look up sharply. "What?" "I got a call from my landlord today. The people in 2A are moving out next month, and he asked if I knew anyone who might be interested in taking over their lease." My heart sank. Of course this was too good to last. Sarah had been incredibly generous, letting me stay here while I got back on my feet, but I'd always known it was temporary. She probably wanted her space back, wanted to be able to have overnight guests without worrying about her charity case roommate. "I understand," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can start looking for my own place. I've been saving money from the new job, so I should be able to afford something small." Sarah stared at me for a moment, then started laughing. "Hannah, no. I was going to ask if you wanted to look at it together. As in, maybe we could upgrade to a bigger place. Together. Permanently." "Oh." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "I thought you were trying to get rid of me. Are you kidding? You're the best roommate I've ever had. You do dishes without being asked. You don't leave your stuff everywhere. And you haven't once judged me for eating ice cream for breakfast on my days off. Plus, I actually like having you around." The relief was so intense it was almost physical. Over the past 3 weeks, I'd grown to love our little routine. Morning coffee together when our schedules allowed. Evening conversations about our days. The comfortable companionship of someone who understood the peculiar stresses of healthcare work. More than that, Sarah had become the first real friend I'd had in years. Not someone I hung out with because we worked together or went to school together, but someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with, someone who made me feel like the best version of myself. "I'd love to look at the other apartment," I said. "But are you sure? I mean, we've only known each other for 3 weeks. Some people you know for years and never really understand," Sarah said, closing her textbook and giving me her full attention. "Others, you connect with immediately. You're good people, Hannah. I trust you." Those 4 words, "I trust you," meant more to me than she could possibly know. When was the last time someone had said that to me? When was the last time I'd felt truly trusted, valued, wanted for who I was rather than what I could provide? We spent the next hour looking at photos of apartment 2A on the landlord's website. It was bigger than Sarah's current place, with 2 real bedrooms instead of 1 bedroom, and a converted den, a larger kitchen, and a balcony that faced the harbor with an actual view of the water. "The rent's only about $200 more than what I'm paying now," Sarah said, doing calculations on her phone. "So it would actually be cheaper for both of us than our current arrangement." "It's perfect," I said, and meant it. Not just the apartment, but the whole situation. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based on what I wanted, not what was expected of me, or what would make other people happy. As we were closing the laptop and getting ready for bed, Sarah's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and her expression shifted subtly, not exactly sad, but guarded. "I should take this," she said. "It's my sister." I'd heard Sarah mention her sister a few times. Elena, 2 years younger, still lived in Tampa near their parents. Unlike Sarah, she'd chosen to maintain a relationship with the family despite their reaction to Sarah's sexuality. Sarah walked out onto the balcony to take the call, but even through the glass door, I could hear the tension in her voice, the careful politeness that meant she was trying to keep peace while protecting herself. When she came back inside 20 minutes later, she looked drained. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Family stuff," she said with a sigh. "Elena thinks I should come to our cousin's wedding next month. Says it's been 3 years, and maybe it's time to build bridges." I waited, sensing there was more. "The thing is, my parents will be there. Elena swears they've softened, and that they miss me. But," she trailed off, running her hands through her hair, "I don't know if I'm ready for that conversation, or if I'll ever be." I thought about my own parents, about the text from Ethan I'd never answered, about the complete silence that had followed my departure from their lives. Part of me understood the appeal of building bridges, of trying to repair what was broken, but a larger part of me had learned, over these past few weeks, that sometimes broken things needed to stay broken. "What does your gut tell you?" I asked. "In that 3 years of peace and self-respect are worth more than 1 day of pretending everything's fine for the sake of family harmony." "Then trust your gut," Sarah smiled. some of the tension leaving her shoulders. You know what? You're right. Elena means well, but she's never had to choose between being herself and being accepted by them. She doesn't understand that some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. We said goodnight and went to our respective rooms, but I lay awake for a while thinking about families and choices and the different ways people showed love. In the hospital earlier that day, I'd seen Mrs. Patterson's immediate, protective concern for her husband. I'd watched parents pace frantically while their teenager got stitches. I'd witnessed the kind of automatic, unquestioning love that I'd always assumed was universal. But I'd also learned that love could be conditional, that families could be sources of pain as well as comfort, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was walk away from people who claimed to love you, but couldn't accept who you were. My phone buzzed with a text message, and for a moment, my heart did its familiar skip, hoping against hope that it might be my parents finally reaching out. Instead, it was from Jenny at work. Great job today with the Patterson family. Maria asked me to tell you she's really impressed with how you've settled in. Welcome to the TCM family. I read the message twice, smiling despite the late hour. The TCM family. It was probably just a figure of speech, the kind of thing people said about close-knit workplaces. But lying there in my comfortable bed, in an apartment I was going to share with someone who actually valued my presence, it felt like more than that. It felt like belonging. The next morning, Sarah and I toured apartment 2A with the landlord, a friendly older man named Mr. Chen, who'd apparently owned the complex for 20 years. The apartment was even better in person, bright and airy, with windows that let in the morning light, and a kitchen big enough for both of us to cook without getting in each other's way. The previous tenants took excellent care of it, Mr. Chen said, pointing out the newly refinished hardwood floors and the updated bathroom fixtures. And I know Sarah's a good tenant, so if she vouches for you, that's good enough for me. We signed the lease that afternoon, effective at the beginning of next month. As we walked back to our current apartment, both of us carrying copies of our rental agreement, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Excitement about the future. I can't believe we just did that, Sarah said, grinning as we climbed the stairs to apartment 2B. And we're going to be real roommates, with a real lease and everything. And a harbor view, I added. Don't forget the harbor view. How could I forget? You only mentioned it about 15 times during the tour. That evening, we celebrated with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine Sarah had been saving for a special occasion. As we sat on the balcony, watching the sun set over the water and planning how we'd arrange the furniture in our new place, I thought about how much my life had changed in just 3 weeks. I had a job I loved, a friend who'd become like family, and a future that was entirely my own creation. I was 27 years old, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My parents had told me to find another place, and I had. But more than that, I'd found myself, 6 months after that devastating Tuesday, when my parents left me a note telling me to find another place. I found myself standing on the beach at sunrise, watching the waves roll in while I sipped coffee from my favorite mug, the one Sarah had bought me that said, "World's Okayest Roommate," to match her own nursing shirt. It was my day off, and I'd gotten into the habit of coming here when I needed to think. The beach was always different, sometimes calm and glass-like, other times wild with whitecaps that crashed against the shore with enough force to make the sand tremble under my feet. Today, it was somewhere in between, peaceful but alive, like the ocean was breathing in slow, steady rhythms. I'd been coming here a lot lately, because 3 days ago, something had happened that I'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. My mother had called, not texted, not sent a message through Ethan, actually called, her name appearing on my phone screen while I was eating lunch in the hospital cafeteria, causing me to nearly choke on my sandwich. I'd stared at the phone for so long it went to voicemail. Then I'd sat there for another 10 minutes, knowing I should listen to the message but unable to bring myself to do it. When I finally pressed play, her voice sounded smaller than I remembered, uncertain in a way that was completely unlike the confident mother who'd raised me. "Hannah, it's Mom. Your father and I have been thinking about you, about what happened. Could you call us back? We'd like to talk to you. We miss you, honey. We miss you, honey." I'd listened to that message at least 20 times since then, analyzing every word, every pause, every inflection. Did she really miss me? Or did she just miss the idea of having a dutiful daughter who never caused problems? Was this genuine regret, Or had something happened that made them realize they needed me for something? The cynical part of me, the part that had grown stronger and more protective over the past 6 months, whispered that it was probably the latter. Maybe Ethan had disappointed them somehow, and they were remembering that I'd been the reliable one. Maybe they were getting older, and realizing they might need someone to take care of them someday. Maybe they just didn't like how it looked to their friends and neighbors that their daughter had disappeared from their lives without explanation. But there was another part of me, the part that still remembered being 5 years old and feeling safe and loved in my mother's arms, that wondered if maybe, just maybe, they'd realized what they'd lost. "You're up early," a voice said behind me, and I turned to see Sarah walking across the sand, carrying her own coffee mug and a small paper bag that probably contained the blueberry muffins from the bakery near our new apartment. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted, making room for her on the piece of driftwood I'd claimed as my thinking spot. "Too much on my mind." The phone call. I'd told Sarah about my mother's voicemail the night it happened, and she'd listened with the kind of patience and understanding that had become one of the things I treasured most about our friendship. She never pushed me to make decisions faster than I was ready for, never told me what I should or shouldn't do. She just listened and offered perspective when I asked for it. "I keep going back and forth," I said, accepting half of a still warm muffin. "Part of me wants to call them back, see if maybe we can work things out. And part of me thinks I'm crazy for even considering it. What does your gut tell you?" It was the same question I'd asked her months ago about her cousin's wedding, and she'd ultimately decided not to go. Her family had been disappointed, but she'd been at peace with her choice. I envied her certainty. That's the problem. I don't know. Some days I feel angry and think they don't deserve a second chance. Other days I feel sad and miss having parents, even if they weren't perfect. And some days I feel guilty, like maybe I should have tried harder to be the daughter they wanted. Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching a pair of pelicans skim the waves in perfect formation. "Can I tell you something?" "Always." A few weeks ago, my sister Elena called again. She told me my mom had asked about me, wanted to know if I was happy. Elena said Mom seemed genuinely sad about the way things ended between us. I turned to look at her, surprised. She hadn't mentioned this conversation. "What did you tell her?" I told her the truth, that I'm happier than I've ever been, that I have a job I love, friends who accept me exactly as I am, and a life that feels authentically mine. And then Elena asked me something that really made me think. She paused, breaking off a piece of muffin and tossing it to a seagull that had been eyeing us hopefully. She asked me if I thought I could have that same happiness while also having a relationship with our parents, if maybe enough time had passed that we could find a middle ground. "What did you say?" I said I didn't know. "But I've been thinking about it ever since." Sarah looked at me directly, her expression serious. "I think the question isn't whether they've changed or whether they deserve forgiveness. The question is whether you've grown strong enough in who you are that their approval or disapproval can't shake you anymore." That hit me like a physical blow, not because it was harsh, but because it was exactly the insight I'd been struggling toward on my own. "When I first moved out here," Sarah continued, "I was so hurt and angry that any contact with my family felt like it might destroy the life I was trying to build. I needed that separation to figure out who I was without their voices in my head. But now I know who I am. I know I'm gay, and I'm proud of it. I know I'm a good nurse and a good friend and a good person, regardless of what they think. I know that their love was conditional, and I deserve better than that. But I also know that I can choose to have limited contact with them without compromising myself, if that's what I want." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun climb higher over the Atlantic. The beach was starting to fill with early morning joggers and dog walkers, the peaceful solitude giving way to the gentle bustle of a new day beginning. "I think I need to call them back," I said finally. "Not because I owe them anything, but because I need to know if there's any possibility of a relationship that doesn't require me to diminish myself." Sarah nodded. "And if there isn't, then at least I'll know for sure, and I can stop wondering." That evening, after Sarah had left for her night shift at the hospital, I sat in our living room with my phone in my hands, staring at my mother's contact information. Our new apartment was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of boats returning to the marina as the sun set. I thought about everything I'd gained in the past 6 months. A job that challenged and fulfilled me, a best friend who'd become the sister I'd never had, a home that felt like a sanctuary instead of a performance space, a sense of myself that wasn't dependent on anyone else's validation. I thought about the Hannah who'd lived in her childhood bedroom, trying desperately to earn love that seemed always just out of reach, that Hannah felt like a different person now, someone I remembered fondly but could never go back to being. I dialed my parents' number before I could lose my nerve. Mom answered on the second ring, as if she'd been waiting by the phone. Hannah? Her voice was breathless, hopeful, and suddenly I was 7 years old again, calling her from a sleepover when I got homesick. Hi, Mom. Oh, honey, I'm so glad you called back. Your father's here too. Let me put you on speaker. Hannah? Dad's voice was softer than I remembered, less authoritative. How are you, sweetheart? I'm good, I said, and realized I meant it. But I'm really good, actually. We've been so worried about you, Mom said, and I could hear tears in her voice. When you left without saying goodbye, we didn't know if you were safe or where you went, or if you were angry with us. The old Hannah would have rushed to reassure them, would have minimized her own hurt to make them feel better. But the new Hannah, the one who'd learned her own worth, needed to be honest. I was angry, I said quietly. I was hurt and angry and felt like you were throwing me away. Silence on their end. Then Dad cleared his throat. We handled that badly, Hannah. We thought we were encouraging your independence. Ethan had been pushing us to convert your room to an office, and we thought maybe it was time for you to start your own life. But we should have talked to you, Mom added quickly. We should have discussed it as a family instead of just leaving you a note. That was cruel, and we're sorry. An apology. It was more than I'd expected, but somehow less than what I needed. Why didn't you just ask me to move out? I asked. Why did it have to be a note left on the kitchen table like I was some stranger you wanted to get rid of? Another long pause. And when Mom spoke again, her voice was smaller. Because we were afraid you'd be upset, and we didn't want to deal with conflict. There it was. The truth that explained so much about my childhood, about why I'd always felt like I had to be perfect, why emotional honesty had never been safe in our house. They'd avoided the difficult conversation because it would have been uncomfortable, and they'd convinced themselves that their comfort was more important than my feelings. We know we hurt you, Dad said, and we want to make it right. Could you come home? We could talk about this properly, face to face. Come home. The words that 6 months ago would have filled me with relief now felt complicated. This is my home now, I said gently, but firmly. I have a life here, a job I love, friends who have become family. I'm not moving back to Winter Park, but surely you could visit, Mom said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. For dinner, maybe, or a weekend. I looked around our living room, at the photos Sarah and I had hung on the walls, at the plants we'd bought together to make the space feel alive, at the kitchen table where we'd shared hundreds of meals and conversations. This was home, not because it was where I'd grown up, but because it was where I'd grown into myself. Maybe someday, I said, but right now, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person I was when I lived with you. I'm not going to shrink myself to fit into the space you've decided I should occupy. I'm not going to compete with Ethan for your attention, or pretend to be less than I am to make you comfortable. We never asked you to do that, Dad protested, but even he sounded uncertain. You didn't have to ask. It was just understood that Ethan was the priority, the one whose achievements mattered, whose future was important. I was the dependable one who would always be there, who didn't need as much attention because I didn't demand it. That's not true, Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. Mom, when I graduated from nursing school, you suggested I become a teacher instead because it was more stable. When Ethan switched majors, you threw him a party. When I told you I was working at one of the best hospitals in Orlando, you asked if I was sure I wouldn't be happier doing something less stressful. When Ethan got his first engineering job, you called everyone you knew to brag. Each example fell into the silence between us like stones into still water, creating ripples that couldn't be taken back. We're proud of you too, Dad said finally, but it sounded hollow even to me. Are you? I asked. Are you proud of the fact that I've built a life for myself from nothing? That I have a job where I save lives and comfort people who are suffering? That I've learned to stand up for myself and recognize my own worth? Or are you just embarrassed that your friends might wonder why your daughter doesn't come around anymore? The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Mom spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We love you, Hannah. I know you do, I said, and I meant it. But love without respect, love without acceptance, love that comes with conditions, that's not the kind of love I need anymore. What do you need? Dad asked, and for the first time, he sounded like he really wanted to know the answer. I thought about that for a moment. looking out at the harbor lights twinkling in the darkness. I need you to see me as I actually am, not as who you think I should be. I need you to be proud of my accomplishments, not disappointed that they're different from Ethan's. I need you to respect my choices, even if you don't understand them. And I need you to understand that I'm not coming back to be the daughter I used to be, because that person was never really me. Could we start over? Mom asked. Could we try to build something new? The hope in her voice broke my heart a little, because I remembered being the daughter who would have done anything to hear those words. But I wasn't that daughter anymore. Maybe, I said honestly, but it would have to be on equal terms. I'm not moving back home. I'm not available to drop everything whenever you need something. I'm not going to pretend that what happened didn't matter, and I'm not going to accept being treated like a lesser member of the family. We understand, Dad said, though I wasn't sure he really did. I'll think about visiting sometime, I said, but it won't be soon, and it won't be often. I need more time to figure out what a relationship with you might look like going forward. We talked for a few more minutes about practical things, my job, my apartment, the fact that I was happy and healthy and building a good life. They asked about my roommate, and I told them about Sarah without mentioning that she was gay, because that wasn't my story to tell, and I wasn't ready to test their acceptance that far. When we finally hung up, I felt drained but oddly peaceful. I'd said what I needed to say, set the boundaries I needed to set, and left the door open for a future relationship without compromising who I'd become. My phone rang almost immediately, and I assumed it was them calling back. But the caller ID showed Sarah's name. How did it go? She asked without preamble. Hard, good, necessary. I curled up on the couch, pulling a throw blanket around me. They apologized, sort of, and they want to try to rebuild our relationship. How do you feel about that? Hopeful, but cautious. I think they mean well, but I also think they don't really understand how much they hurt me or how much I've changed. They want me to come home and pretend everything's fine. But you're not going to do that. No, I'm not. I told them I might visit someday, but that things would have to be different, that I'm not the same person who left their house 6 months ago. Good for you, Sarah said, and I could hear the pride in her voice. That takes courage. I learned from the best, I said. You showed me what it looks like to choose yourself, even when it's hard. We showed each other, she corrected. You've taught me just as much about resilience and starting over. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a while, thinking about families and choices and the different ways people show love. My parents loved me. I believed that now. But their love had always come with the expectation that I would fit into the role they'd assigned me, that I would be grateful for whatever attention I received and never ask for more. Sarah's love, and the love I'd found from my colleagues at work, from the friends I'd made in Stuart, was different. It was based on who I actually was, not who they needed me to be. It was love that celebrated my successes instead of minimizing them, that supported my growth instead of trying to contain it. A year ago, I would have settled for my parents' conditional love because I didn't know anything else was possible. Now, having experienced what real acceptance felt like, I could never go back to that smaller version of myself. My phone buzzed with a text from my brother Ethan. Mom said you called. About time. When are you coming to visit? I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some things weren't worth my energy anymore. Instead, I texted Sarah. Thank you for helping me find my way home. She texted back immediately. Thank you for being the family I chose. The next morning, I was back on the beach at sunrise, but this time I wasn't there to worry or analyze or second-guess myself. I was there to celebrate. In my pocket was an acceptance letter from the University of Florida's Master's in Nursing program, specializing in emergency and trauma care. I'd applied almost on a whim, encouraged by Sarah's example and by Maria Santos, who told me I had the kind of clinical instincts that would make me an excellent advanced practice nurse. The program would take 3 years while working full-time, and it would be challenging in ways I'd never experienced. But as I watched the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt nothing but excitement for the future I was building. My phone rang, and this time, I didn't hesitate to answer when I saw Sarah's name. I have news, I said before she could speak. Me too. You go first. I got into grad school. Hannah, that's amazing. I knew you would. When do you start? This fall. What's your news? My supervisor offered me a promotion to charge nurse. More responsibility, better pay, and it'll look great on my nurse practitioner applications. Sarah, that's incredible. We're both moving up in the world. We are. Should we celebrate with breakfast? I'm thinking pancakes and mimosas at that place by the marina. It's 8 in the morning. It's Saturday. We're both off work, and we're celebrating major life achievements. I think day drinking is not only appropriate, but mandatory. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. You're right. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. As I walked back to my car, I thought about the note my mother had left on the kitchen table 6 months ago. Find another place. At the time, it had felt like rejection, like being thrown away. But now I understood it differently. They'd told me to find another place, and I had. I'd found a place where I was valued for who I was, not who I pretended to be. I'd found a place where my dreams mattered, where my growth was celebrated, where my presence was wanted rather than tolerated. I'd found a place where I could build the kind of life I'd always wanted but never had the courage to pursue. I'd found myself, and I'd found home. The drive to the marina took me past the apartment complex where Sarah and I had first met, past the hospital where I'd discovered I could be more than just competent, I could be exceptional, past the beach where I'd learned to sit with difficult emotions without letting them consume me, past all the places that had become part of my story, the geography of my transformation. At the restaurant, Sarah was already waiting at a table overlooking the water, 2 mimosas already ordered, and a stack of grad school brochures spread across the table between us. To finding our places, she said, raising her glass when I sat down. To choosing our families, I replied, clinking my glass against hers. We spent the morning planning our futures, talking about the classes we'd take, and the careers we'd build, and the impact we hoped to have. We talked about travel plans and weekend adventures and all the possibilities that stretched out ahead of us like the endless Florida horizon. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. My parents had told me to find another place, and I'd done exactly that. But more than finding a new location or a new job or a new apartment, I'd found something much more valuable. I'd found myself, and I'd learned that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose.